this panel. Another point that I think should be added to this as governance, it is not really familiar to in English language literature, but is very, very well-known concept in French language literature, the distinction between governance as the set of processes that leads to regulation, and regulation, on the other hand, the sets of techniques, of tools that allow to create equilibrium in a system that is naturally not in a balanced format. So these also distinction between governance as process and regulation as a set of tools and technique, I think may also be useful for the debate. And by coincidence, I wrote a book on this, so I can also share it in the chat if you are interested. Now, last but not least, we have still an intervention. We have Natalie van Remdonk that wanted to share something. Please, Natalie.
Hi, thanks, Luca, and thanks everyone on this panel. I had a question that might have come up in your previous Dynamic Coalition papers. But I'm coming from a cybersecurity angle, where I've met Luca before as well. And in the global conversation on cybersecurity and stability in cyberspace, we've developed these norms on a UN level, but also on a private sector level that have a lot of commonality, that they've become, universally applicable norms. And I'm wondering if this process, where does this stand for platform governance? Is there a sort of universally applicable principles of platform governance and content moderation? And I'm not talking about illegal content. I think what Julia Facebook said herself is that they also lack overarching principles, which make it sometimes a bit random in the application. So I'm just wondering if there, in the few initiatives that exist, like I've seen about the Santa Clara principles on content moderation and the safe networking principles, if there is a commonality, and where does this process stand? Sorry for such an elaborate question at the end of a very interesting conversation.
I would ask Nicolo to provide his reply on this, plus the final wrap-up remarks, so that then we will finalize this session, because we are already 10 minutes or besides our final deadline. So please, Nico, provide your view on this. I will take advantage of my position as a moderator to say that we have also elaborated recommendations and best practices that could be useful for platforms. But I know that Nico also has more views on these, so please, Nico, go ahead. And
I think we're already out of time. That's an excellent answer. I mean, I can refer to our output in 2017 on platform regulations, why they're regulated and why they regulate us, where we go through, all the different normative references that were relevant in this space, and we try to suggest, some way forward. I guess, we can talk privately more in detail. Now, I just wanted to thank everyone, and also say that it was a very useful comment, this one about the languages. I think we should be thinking, if we want to include a stakeholder's view, we should be thinking about translating this at some point in some of the other languages, like, for example, French, Portuguese, and maybe Chinese, so we can reach the whole, a broad spectrum of stakeholders. But yeah, when is the right moment? That's something that we should also ask ourselves. So we should move forward with the comments, and at some point decide that this is something to be shared more widely to other communities, other languages. But I think this overall was a fantastic exercise, and it's just the beginning. So thank you for being with us, and we'll be together in this journey at least until next year, when we will publish the final outcome. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, and especially Nicolo and Luca, shout out.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Hello.
Hi, Claudia.
Sorry, I muted my microphone. I was going to share again the chat because they asked it, but they already leave, so I don't think.
Oh, so this is the unique form to have access to it. I didn't know. I thought they would ask directly. Well, we can maybe save it and send it to Louise. What do you think?
Yes, I think it's the best. I don't know. You can close it. I don't mind.
How can I save it? Do you know? I'm not
I
totally
know
aware.
I did this twice. So when you shut down, after it comes, just save the chat. They don't come the live, the video, and all this stuff. Or at least I never.
Okay. Let me check on it. I just took the option here.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Okay. So with apologies for the delay, I think we can start this session. My name is Peter Koch. I'm with the steering committee of the German IGF, and I'm a member of the technical community in IGF terms. I would like to welcome the attendees and panelists for the session. Before we start, I would like to give a short statement. As many of you have heard earlier today, we are missing Marilyn Cade, who passed away yesterday. Marilyn was an intensely engaged, passionate, and inspiring contributor to the Internet Governance Forum. In particular, she was dedicated to the NRIs, and she was a great mentor for many of us across the globe. We would like to dedicate this session to her memory. Thank you. So I would now like to introduce the first panel. We have contributions from 4 NRIs, from France, from Brazil, from the United States, and from Northern Macedonia. I would like to give the floor to Lucien Castex, who will report from the France IGF. We will have roughly 3 minutes per speaker. This first session will run until roughly 18:45 UTC, and we'll have a discussion afterwards before we go to the second panel. Lucien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, for giving me the floor. 3 minutes is quite challenging indeed. Try to sum up a bit what is going on in France and shed some light on, obviously, the European Union framework. The first point I would like to speak of is basically we have a reform going on, which is the Digital Service Act. The current framework was unchanged since the e-commerce directive, which was adopted in the year 2000. And in the context of a fast changing digital world, basically the reform is going on. And there is a lot of debate in France and obviously in the European Union about the Digital Service Act. Basically, the idea, and the text is still a draft, obviously, is to have new rules, for example, for gatekeepers, to allow new entrant, open innovation, and also strengthen consumer choice, and tackle the emergence of new actors, basically online platforms and other big tech. In France, we had a few initiatives. First, we have a disinformation law, which is aiming at tackling fake news online. The law was passed in 2018. It aims to empower basically judges to order the immediate removal of fake news, particularly during election campaign. It's creating new transparency obligation for digital platforms, including a duty of cooperation to basically force online platform to introduce measures to eliminate fake news. And this is basically the main idea. The French audiovisual regulator, the Conseil supérieur de l'audiovisuel, is in charge of checking for compliance. And there is a new legal injunction aiming at stopping the spread of fake news. Basically, an interim judge will qualify what is a fake news, and it's clearly quite difficult. And then if it's manifest and if it's disseminated deliberately on a massive scale, it can order its immediate removal. The second piece of legislation, very quickly, that I want to shed light on, is basically the debate on hate speech and basically countering online hatred. We had a strong debate last year in France in early 2020 about a law against hate speech, which was usually called the Avia law. But the French Constitutional Council declared in last June, basically, that the majority of the law was unconstitutional, and most provisions are basically invalid on the ground of freedom of expression, saying that freedom of speech and communication are not necessarily appropriate and proportionate to the aim pursued, and so most of the law is censored. Last point, we have a few points on terrorism. Basically, there is an ongoing reform on that point, but it's very, very, very early in stage. It's just being debated. So that's about it.
Thanks, Lucien. And indeed, we have a bit more time than I gave you in the first instance. So if you have anything to follow up, you can do that now or in the discussion. With that, I would like to ask Diogo Cortiz to share experiences from Brazil, please.
Right, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone. Here in Brazil, like content moderation is a big topic now because there are a lot of evidence in our last elections that some fake news, misinformation content spread out of the network. Okay. And also some toxic content being published on the web, especially on social media. So we need to try to find some way to deal with those challenges, especially misinformation and also toxic contents, what we usually call hate speech. Here in Brazil, there is now a debate on the Congress. There is a bill that's called like fake news bill to try to deal with this subject, especially regarding messaging services. For example, WhatsApp. So in the initial proposal, the idea was to kind of collect and store all the messages so from WhatsApp. So in some way to have a mechanism to track when and who started a rumor or a fake news. But it's not well accepted by the technical community. There are a lot of issues on that proposal, and this bill is under discussion in the Congress. Actually, I'm from the technical team. So we are also investigating many different tools, many different technologies to help to deal with content moderation. Especially, I'm leading a project using machine learning and natural language processing to detect some kind of harmful content on social media. And here we are discussing a lot about some technical challenges and also ethical challenges, especially for our reality here in Brazil. Actually, I'm working very closely with people from UK. I was a visiting professor at Queen Mary University of London. And for example, just to give an example, to train a model to recognize, for example, hate speech, you need like local data, because you have different languages, but you also have different realities, different cultures, and so on. And just to compare, for example, the teams in UK that were working with English, they were working with a data set with about 100,000 sentences, for examples, so that could be used for machine learning, for training machine learning. And here, for example, in Brazil, the biggest one that we have nowadays is like 5,000. So it's pretty small. So we have what we call low resources to train all those models. So now we are trying to invest our efforts to create new data sets together with some partners, but we also have some problems regarding some ethical and also legal challenges, because from the ethical problem that we need to collect real data from social media, because I cannot train a machine learning model to detect fake news or hate speech on social media using, for example, sentences and texts written by journalists, because the way that it's written is completely different. It's like canonical and non-canonical. So we need to collect the data. So here we are facing also a challenge, an ethical challenge about privacy, because some social media, it's okay to collect data using their API, but there is some ethical problems that this person publish, for example, a sentence just to express their feelings, their opinions, and now we are collecting to train a model, for example, to do something. So it's like an ethical challenges that we are also discussing here in Brazil, and I can go further on my next round. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diogo. And this brings us to a slightly different theme. We've heard about platforms and the way to assess and deal with content. Now, Melinda Clem from the US IGF will talk about potential standards for content regulation that would balance human rights and freedoms online. And she will also dive into the question how content regulation practices maybe interfere with internet identifiers. Melinda, please.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for your kind opening remarks about Maryland. She's very much in all of our hearts, including Nola Cat here, a big friend of Maryland. Thank you for the time. Obviously, this is a hot topic in the United States. It was something that we covered in IGF USA this summer. The guiding law in the United States is under the Communications Decency Act, Section 230. You'll hear this that nomenclature. You see it tweeted from time to time. What that does is provides what's called intermediary liability. It's a protection for specific types of internet computer service providers that include, platforms all the way down to the infrastructure layer of domain registries and registrars. The ability to moderate content and enforce terms of services with very specific what are called AUPs, acceptable use policies. Those will define what is typically prohibited. It will be very prescriptive about the types of content that are not allowed. What we find is the application of those is where a lot of the distinction and concerns is applied, is how you balance what's acceptable and what's not. And what, anecdotally speaking, I think the easiest way to define a solution here that is going to balance, all of our various human rights, as well as the specific legal rights that we have in the United States, predominantly around free speech, is that, the more narrow you define a problem, the more you define the content that's being targeted, the relatively easier, again, relatively being, carrying a lot of weight here, the easier it is to police and moderate, identify that content. As Diogo just mentioned, right, it's difficult to broadly scan and review, but we find it's a lot easier to have a very specific targeted action. So for example, throughout all areas of the internet over the last 8 months, we've been looking at how do we identify mis and disinformation around the pandemic. That falls in that bucket of, very clearly defined actions that you can take. You can do things like keyword searches, things that have been around for over 20 years, technology that's advanced. There's ways of looking at if drugs are being sold and looking at certain aspects of the sales process. You can find ways that spam is being used to manipulate the DNS that's promoting these sorts of materials. That's an example of a very targeted means of doing content moderation that can balance our rights. Another one that we find that works quite well is the eradication of CSAM. And there are several technical solutions out there to date, some including by Microsoft and Rackspace, that have been designed and licensed for free to review and try to find that sort of material to help eradicate it. In instances where those are not used, we do have more manual processes available to us to be responsive to organizations, trusted intermediaries, or third parties to help fill those gaps where we don't have technology today, and we're still in the process of doing it. Then that gets us into the broader scale of technical solutions. And you have more proprietary uses of artificial intelligence. I think the most popular and known is what Facebook does. This is how they do a lot of content moderation, producing lists that then human beings can follow up on. But again, that is a proprietary solution open to them today. I do want to note that several of these companies that we'll be talking about and that are of concern, we're fortunate enough to have as participants and members and financial supporters of IGF USA. It allows us to have some very rich conversations that talk about both the policy and the technology. This year, we talked a lot more about the policy aspect, rather, to try to define what needs to be done, then we get to the how. So that was the majority of our conversation this year.
Thanks a lot, Melinda. And this brings us to the fourth report jointly provided, and I should say, of course, from the Northern Macedonia IGF, jointly provided by Anastas Mishev and Bodo Jakimovsky. It's your floor.
Thank you. I'm sorry for the camera. I had issues with my laptop. I didn't have time to reboot it. Today what we will be talking about is the establishment of the National E-Learning Platform, which was a short notice project that was developed during the last month, prior to the start of the school year. It was a technical difficulty put on upon the academia to technically deliver a national system for e-learning and online learning for around 200,000 students in primary and secondary schools. This was mainly due to the elections that were previously scheduled during the summer, and there were no decision makers available to support the earlier start of such system development. And this has proven to be a great collaboration in just 1 month to develop, deploy, and organize trainings and solve huge technical difficulties of scale up of such system, and also provide additional content as much as possible for the system to start functioning. I must say it was a great and companies. So and I think that we as members of IGF and being involved in such a project proved that this triple helix collaboration is a possibility. It can provide very good solutions for the community, and yeah, I'm proud of the project that was done in very short notice. And as I said, the school year started on time. Anastas.
I would just like to add that content regulation is also a big part of this platform that what we are mentioning here, because of the specificity of the target audience being the youngsters, the pupils of the primary and secondary schools. So it based on the previous experience that we had, that many of those social networks and communication channels were used as a media for distributing material that's not adequate, or material that is not adequate for these groups. So now we have to also think about the technical solutions that we also need to implement in this platform regarding the content regulation. But that's only part of it, I would say. The content regulation from the technical point of view, for us, at least for us engineers, always seems a little bit easier than the other aspect, which is the policy aspect. And when you hit the lack of policies, the lack of legislative to support all these things, it's much more difficult. And it showed itself in a worst case during these pandemics, being over flooded with all kinds of informations, which from non-relevant sources being using this to gain political advantage, using this to gain any other advantage, showed itself in a very bad light. So aligning, for me, the biggest issue that we also need to like to discuss is that how to align the legal and the technical frameworks, and when does the content regulation stop and the freedom of speech begins. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to the panelists. We now back perfect on time. And we have up to the top of the hour to engage into a discussion Some questions have already been submitted to the Q&A pod, and there's also been a lively discussion and exchange in the chat already. So I'd suggest I'll summarize some of the questions, and then we'll open it to the panelists to respond to, and see how the audience reacts. So there's one request to differentiate between content moderation at the, say, platform level or content layer versus moderation or attempts of content moderation by way of dealing with the identifier system. And that is the internet governance speak for names and numbers, so domain names or IP addresses. So there's the plea to differentiate that. And also, since we are reporting here from the perspective of the various NRIs, and some of you already have given the examples, it would be interesting to understand how exactly the respective NRI could be influential in either having a regulation in place or inform the regulation by a national or regional legislator, or come up with other models of multi-stakeholder response or approach to potential content regulation. And the last contribution, I think, was a perfect example of that. Any of the panelists would like to go first?
Well, I think Melinda asked to answer the question, so go ahead, Melinda.
Okay, sure. Melinda, please.
Okay, thanks. I'll start with the identifier system and disclose that I am employed by Affiliates, the second largest domain registry, and I'm the chairwoman of the board of the Internet Infrastructure Coalition. And this is something that we spend a lot of time lobbying and educating US regulators in particular about the extremely blunt tool and instruments that the infrastructure layer has available when it comes to content moderation. Because we sit anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 degrees away from the actual content and the producer of the content, because we're outside of that path of content creation, our only tool is to remove the entirety of a domain name. So what that means is we've got, if someone's running a blog service and you have, the example blog.com, the only option is to take down all of blog.com and every blog that's there to cure, one blog with, that is clearly violating the rules of the blog.com and making that happen. So it does put a different perspective on how we can address the problem. And it makes it very clear that when you come up with solutions, you have to consider both that category of things that I call refer to as the operating model that gets into technically how you would proceed with action, as well as the business model. Because I think the other important aspect that goes unnoticed and that needs to be more clarified is that at the identifier layer, we're not in, our only monetization is really about selling those domain names and hosting. We're not in the business of collecting money on promotion, on prioritizing content in any sort of way. So we're not financially incentivized in any way to manipulate content or get you to it faster. That's not the way the DNS is built, right? We can't do that, and we're not at all suggesting that. So both of those need to be considered as we develop solutions. Specifically in the United States, that's part of the concern around these proposed changes to 230, which in general, the sector is stridently opposed to. What we see as the better solution is, again, targeted approaches for specific problems that we deal with standards and norms of behavior. Specifically, again, let's because we're still in an election cycle here in the United States. There were specific actions taken and enforcement and review that was done. A lot of that being, done by a lot of parties, including the FTC here in the United States, and working with the different providers and trying to define what's appropriate and what's not, what needs to be moderated. That sort of specificity, we think, is a better approach, where everybody comes to the table, defines, what we need to be doing and how we can do it together. To counter specific issues.
Thanks, Melinda. So, Lucien, may I put you on the spot to also elaborate on that distinction between platforms and identifiers? Also because you have a national regulator to deal with, but also a European legislator. And you might have certain experiences with that dual intervention.
Thank you, Peter. Indeed, it's quite a challenge. The first point, I agree with Melinda on that quite. It's very difficult to actually distinguish between harmful and illegal content. Basically, from a legal standpoint, there is a number of different legal area: hate speech, slander, IP rights, child pornography, and so on. So in France, it's under criminal law, it's also under civil law, and there is ongoing debate at the European level, obviously with the DSA and other regulation on terrorism, for example, that try to increase liability of online platforms. But still, when you are on content, basically it's a gray area. You have some content which can be evaluated quite easily, but most of it's quite complex. So basically, we would need an appropriate, rigorous evaluation of the content to determine if it's illegal or not. And when you are, I don't know, from the CCTLD, for example, standpoint, you don't have the power to actually establish the illegality of the content. And as Melinda said just a couple minutes ago, you do not host any content, and no content actually go through your infrastructure. So it's from a technical standpoint, you have no control over the content of the website, and taking down the website, well, it's quite a lot, clearly. So defining the legality or the illegality of the content is a main problem. And in France, the fake news, the disinformation law is quite a good example. So hate speech law, as I said, was mostly taken down by the Constitutional Council. Well, that's it.
Merci, Lucien. So Diogo, may I come back to you and ask you to maybe shed a bit of light on how that multi-stakeholder discussion in Brazil worked, as in from a technical perspective, but also from other perspectives, discussing the complex system that we've touched upon already now, that spans from identifiers to platforms, and how did that make your life easier or more difficult when it came to reaching a conclusion?
Okay, so I work especially with like the application layer, so especially with content, and my objective is to identify or to train or to research if it's possible to use machine learning in Brazil to help companies to identify some harmful contents, especially misinformation and hate speech. because as you may know, we have a lot of platforms here in Brazil that are not Brazil based. So the teams for content moderation here in Brazil is reduced. So what actually I'm working right now is investigating how machine learning can help in the moderation process. So from the DNS point of view, I'm not the best person to give an answer, but from the application level, what we are discussing here is whether machine learning tools can help this kind of those platforms to moderate content, or at least to it's like a flashlight for all the contents. So it's if it's artificial intelligence can be used as a flashlight for all the contents to, in some cases, put a flag in the content, say, oh, maybe here in this content it's a hate speech like racism, that goes to the moderation team. But for this purpose, we have a lot of technical challenges that I can discuss briefly here. The first one is that we do not have some legal definitions, for example, for hate speech or for misinformation. So to train a model based on machine learning to help in this kind of content moderation, we rely on experts. So for who is not familiar with machine learning process, we need data. We say supervised learning. So you need a data set, and the data set need to be annotated, okay, by humans. So one challenge that we have is who is annotating those data sets, for example, to identify hate speech, and also what is our model is reflecting about hate speech content, misinformation. So those are the two main challenges that we are facing here in Brazil. So for example, at the Web Technology Study Center, that is hosted by the Brazilian Network Information Center, we worked with the Queen Mary University of London. We trained a model with a high accuracy, it's about 90%, to detect hate speech in Portuguese. And it's completely open source, so everyone can use. It's on GitHub now. So people from companies, different companies, private companies, and also researching, they are using these systems to try to find harmful contents, especially on the web layer. So that's my main work. So the technical challenges in the content layer, in like the application layer.
Thanks a lot, Diogo. Now back to the North Macedonia IGF, Anastas Orboro. Similar question to you. In your discussions in your internet governance environment or your national IGF, what challenges do you see when it comes to distinguishing the content layer and the identifier layer, and the complexities and interactions on the technical side?
Well, if I would like to take a step back a little bit. The crisis revealed a very weak point in the country's internet governance and connectivity, which was, of course, the lack of a national exchange point. Our traffic was going all around the country. For a country of less than 2 million, that is 100 by 200 kilometers in size. For the traffic to go to use and load the international links was something that was unfortunately happening up to very soon. And this crisis actually revealed this very weak spot here. And since the organization that was supposed to that was mandated by the state to do this did not ever did it, we took our hands as academia, as a university, took it in our hands and established the first national internet exchange point. And IXPs maintained. We talked to the operators, we talked to the CCTLD, and it seems that our natural step forward, and we did it. We established it. It's much better now. The content is local now. It's the quality of the online lectures. It's better along from, which is what was most important from our side. And then I believe that our next point, next natural step would be to go then into to talk to the operators, to talk to the CCTLD, and to of course, to talk to the, it's very important to talk to the policymakers, which are also involved in our IGF, and see this in this multi-stakeholder model, find the best way to apply the content regulation, at least at the identifiers level, if not, then later maybe using advanced technologies, even in the content layer per se. But as far as the identifier layers is, we are initiating this conversation, initiating these talks with the stakeholders in the country, especially the operators. But now it's very easy; they're in our premises, present with the ministries relevant for the policy making, and with the top level domain in the country, to see what are the possibilities. First from the point of view of protecting the youngsters from the harmful content, and then even make it even more general.
Thank you so much. So meanwhile, there was again quite an interesting exchange. People are deemed to do multitasking, obviously, which is great. An interesting exchange with in the chat. And I'd like to go back to one question that Sebastian Schwimmer introduced, or maybe shared an observation, more or less. Let me get back to find it. So Sebastian wrote, I understand the technical and conceptual issues when it came to, that's me interjecting, when it came to content layer versus technical layer or identifier layer. And then again, Sebastian wrote, yet content moderation is performed, in brackets then, e.g. notice and takedown mechanism by SIDN, the Dutch TLD registry, trusted notifier regimes, healthy domain initiative, DNS Abuse as interpreted by the European Commission, closing bracket. Content moderation is performed. So it seems the borders are getting blurrier in policy discussions. And again, that's the borders between content layer and identifier layer. Marilyn or Lucien, maybe could you address that from your IGF's perspective?
Sure. A couple of important distinctions. So the .nl example, we've got to remember that there's a different regulatory bodies or oversight for CCTLDs and GTLDs. It's a lot easier for a country code and their governing body to have very specific rules about how that CC is managed. By contrast, it is fully outside of ICANN's remit, who manages the GTLD space, to in any way manage content, or even beyond that, other areas that people talk about having some sort of moderation or very proactive role, because they get into cross-border issues, matters of state. You know, if it's something like discussions of things like the cryptocurrency and having registry operators somehow manage that or do takedowns, or cyber terrorism. Again, that's another space where a registry headquartered in a specific country can adjudicate between two matters of state, some sort of cyber warfare that's going on, and nor should they. So I think first and foremost, it's very important to keep those lines very clear and understand, who has a remit and where those jurisdictional lines are. And the more that we clarify them, I think the easier it is for us to, again, start defining solutions and what it is that we're going to work with. The one final point I would mention, you had mentioned some of these specific initiatives and talked about DNS abuse. And this is another one where, again, we really need to keep this focused on technical abuses of the DNS, not these content related areas, phishing, farming, malware, bots, all of those sorts of fast flux, these sorts of things that we can see and manage and disrupt at the DNS layer. That's where we should focus those and keep those definitions clear, and all of that inside of the clearly for GTLDs inside the remit of ICANN, and manage those. And again, not let these lines continue to blur into non-technical content related matters where we can.
Thanks, Melinda. Lucien, before we go to the final round, anything to add to this?
Well, I quite agree on the frontiers. Indeed, content and DNS abuses are quite different. Abusing the DNS on one side and obviously having content on the other side. We had a series of workshops in France on DNS abuse, led by AFNIC, which is the .fr registry. And well, one of the key points we draw from that was basically most people don't see the difference, and including sometimes experts and legislative authorities. And there is a need to clarify who is doing what, clearly, content regulation, legal aspects, DNS abuse, malware, indeed, phishing, and so on. And it is basically understanding how internet is working and what you can do effectively to actually have any impact, on the regulation that you want to promote. And it is a problem of education, clearly, and of understanding of how internet is clearly working.
Thanks a lot, Lucien. So this brings us almost to the end of this session. I see there's another question in the part. We'll answer that in writing, I believe. So time to wrap up. The agenda suggests we do that in the reverse order, but we don't need to stick to the script too formally. So now that we've had reports from various NRIs and different approaches in a multi-stakeholder, in their local or domestic multi-stakeholder venue, the question is, for each and every one, what are the next steps? So what are the concluding commitments, as we call them, that are actionable? So what is your respective NRI working on next to either improve the understanding or to take your effort to a next step? And let me see. Yeah, Anastas or Boro, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so definitely the collaboration between the academia and the government and companies as well will need to continue. We are currently involved as members of IGF in the building the national broadband infrastructure. So we are talking actively with operators for and also with the Ministry for Information Science, for Information Society, on the establishment of this national broadband office, and as well as managing the CCTLD and collaborative managing with the government all of these aspects. So the academia tries to involve together with the ministries and the companies on building the infrastructure and also covering white zones, which is also an issue here as well as in Europe. So making internet available with the subventions of the government to the operators to be able to be available on where there is no commercial benefit for the operators, in order for to make it possible internet for everybody to be available on this on the same price across the entire country.
Thanks a lot. So I think Melinda is next on the list. IGF USA, what are your next steps or commitments even?
We don't have firm commitments. The plan was to continue the dialogue and host. We want to take advantage of all of the work that went into understanding how to put on a good virtual event, and try to have some smaller single topic events. And this was one that we wanted to follow through on. Again, we only spent 70 minutes and only really talked about the policy aspect of it. So a next discussion around specifically 230 and these approaches is something that we've talked about.
Thank you. And I would like to apologize. I maybe put too strong emphasis on commitment. The idea in these sessions is, and I say that for everybody involved or listening, the idea is that the NRIs exchange the ideas here, and then also prepared some next steps that are like actionable. So we say commitment, nobody's going after the NRIs. We know that most all of the work is voluntary effort and can always be overtaken by events, but providing next steps that will also encourage the interaction between the NRIs, because everybody can look what everybody else does. So take it serious, but not too serious. Nobody's getting after you. Thanks, Melinda, again. And next in line is Lucien for the France IGF.
Thank you, Peter. Well, basically, in France, we have still a lot going on, because we had the French IGF not long ago on October 27. And it's quite a different format. We had a plenary on the 27th and a workshop on liability, internet liability. And we have 6 more workshops to go. Next one is in December this year, and 5 in 2021, just before IGF France 2021. So it's a lot to do. And basically the idea is to continue the dialogue and to raise awareness.
Merci, Lucien. And then finally, Diogo, back to Brazil.
Yeah, so we have an ongoing discussion here. We have launched, actually published a report named like Internet, Misinformation and Democracy. That was a report produced by members of CGI, the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, and also experts. And we do not have a final commitment, but it's on discussion. I'm working in one of the initiatives that is using new technologies to deal with those new threats for the content moderation and so on. So from my perspective, I feel confident that machine learning can play an important role to help in the content moderation, not to give the final answer or to remove a content, but to help the moderation team to find like harmful content in this overload data.
Thanks a lot. And that leaves me more or less the final minute to summarize and end the session. So thanks to the panelists and the contributors. Thanks also to the people back home in those various IGF structures, and for the attendees who engaged in the discussion by submitting questions or discussing in the chat. I believe what we've seen is that there's a diverse and vivid community of NRI structures out there tackling problems that are discussed at the global IGF level in this and the next week and during the year. We've heard that people are continuing dialogues by setting up continuous meetings, series of meetings. So in these pandemic times, obviously IGF, national IGF structures or regional IGF structures are a very good way to perform intersessional work with the opportunity to break down the global problems into tangible or edible pieces at the local level and then report back as we just saw. Again, I would like to thank all the contributors for their inspiring contributions. And I think that gives all the other IGF structures and everybody else a lot to learn and to continue the conversation across the different structures. Thanks a lot. And with this, it's my pleasure to have had you here, and I'll close the session. See you again soon.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Peter. Bonne soirée.